"You're not ready for what happened next," she said with that sickly sweet smile, standing in what used to be my dream wedding venue, surveying the absolute chaos she had orchestrated like it was her masterpiece. Patricia Chen, my own mother, wearing her favorite cream-colored blazer and those pearl earrings she only brought out when she wanted to look respectable, stood among overturned tables, scattered rose petals, trampled into the mud, and a sound system that was now nothing more than expensive electronic confetti. The florist was crying. The caterer was on the phone with his insurance company. And my wedding, just 3 days away, lay in ruins around us. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I should have been screaming. I should have been crying. I should have been doing what any normal bride would do when faced with this level of destruction. Instead, I stood perfectly still, watching her admire her handiwork, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in 28 years of being Patricia, Chen's daughter. I felt calm, because while she thought she was destroying my future, she had just handed me the keys to hers. My name is Jessica Chen, and I'm about to tell you how my mother tried to sabotage my wedding, not knowing that my fiancé's family owned the $2 million venue she just destroyed. But more than that, I'm going to tell you how I turned her moment of triumph into the beginning of her downfall, and why sometimes the best revenge isn't getting mad, it's getting methodical. The story really begins 8 months earlier, when David Martinez asked me to marry him on a hiking trail overlooking Phoenix at sunset. David wasn't just my college sweetheart who had somehow managed to love me through my workaholic phases and my family's dysfunction. He was the man who brought me coffee at 2 a.m. when I was pulling all-nighters for my digital marketing clients, who listened to me vent about impossible deadlines, and who never once made me feel like I needed to choose between my career and our relationship. When he dropped to one knee with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, I said yes before he could finish asking the question. The first red flag should have been my mother's reaction when we told my family the news. While my father, Richard, hugged us both, and my sister Amanda squealed with excitement, Patricia sat perfectly still at our dining room table in Scottsdale, her manicured fingers drumming against the wood. After a long pause, she looked directly at David and said, "Well, I suppose every family has different standards." David's smile faltered just slightly, but he recovered with the grace that made me fall in love with him in the first place. He squeezed my hand under the table and said, "I'm just grateful Jessica said yes, Mrs. Chen." That should have been my warning, but I was 28, successful, running my own digital marketing company with a client list that included 3 Fortune 500 companies, and I thought I had finally reached the point where my mother's approval didn't matter. I thought wrong. The wedding planning process revealed layers of Patricia's personality that I had spent years trying to ignore. When David and I showed her photos of Sunset Gardens Estate, the venue we had fallen in love with during our very first visit, she wrinkled her nose like we had suggested getting married in a gas station bathroom. "It's very rustic," she said, though the venue was anything but rustic. Sunset Gardens Estate was a sprawling property with manicured gardens, a ballroom with crystal chandeliers, and a reputation for hosting the most elegant weddings in the Phoenix area. What my mother didn't know, what I was only beginning to understand myself, was that David's family didn't just appreciate fine venues, they owned them. The Martinez family had built Martinez Hospitality Group from the ground up, starting with a single restaurant that David's grandfather had opened in the 1960s. Over the decades, they had expanded into hotels, event spaces, and luxury venues across Arizona and Nevada. David had mentioned the family business in passing during our early dating days, but he was so humble about it that I had assumed it was maybe 1 or 2 small establishments. It wasn't until I met his parents, Maria and Roberto Martinez, that I began to understand the scope of their success. Maria greeted me with a warmth that my own mother had never shown anyone, wrapping me in a hug that smelled like vanilla and asking about my business with genuine interest. Roberto, distinguished with silver hair and laugh lines around his eyes, wanted to hear about every marketing campaign I had run, treating my work like it was as important as any CEO's strategy session. They made me feel valued in a way that was completely foreign to me. During that first dinner at their home in Paradise Valley, I noticed details that spoke to quiet wealth: the original artwork on the walls, the way the house seemed to flow seamlessly from one beautiful room to another, the fact that their kitchen was larger than my entire apartment. But more striking than their obvious success was how normal they made everything feel. There were no pretensions, no need to prove anything to anyone. They were simply a family who had worked hard, built something meaningful together, and now wanted to welcome me into that circle. The contrast with my own family dynamics was stark. Patricia had spent my entire childhood obsessing over appearances, over what the neighbors thought, over maintaining a facade of success that was always just slightly beyond our actual means. She drove a luxury car with payments that stretched the household budget, wore designer clothes that she bought on credit, and insisted on living in a neighborhood where we were always the family barely keeping up. My father, Richard, a kind man who worked as an accountant for a mid-sized firm, enabled her spending habits by working overtime and taking on weekend clients to cover the bills she accumulated in pursuit of her image. Growing up, I learned to be quiet about my achievements because Patricia always found a way to diminish them. When I got a full scholarship to Arizona State University, she complained that it wasn't to a more prestigious school. When I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in marketing, she pointed out that my cousin had become a doctor. When I started my own company at 25 and landed my first major client within 6 months, she worried aloud that I was too ambitious and would never find a husband. David's family was the opposite of everything I had known. They celebrated each other's successes without reservation. When David told them about the marketing campaign I had designed that increased one client's revenue by 40%, Maria clapped her hands together and Roberto raised his wine glass in a toast. When I mentioned that I was nervous about growing my business, Maria immediately started connecting me with other entrepreneurs in their network, and Roberto offered to introduce me to the attorney who had helped them with their corporate expansion. It was during our third visit to Sunset Gardens Estate, while we were finalizing details with Sophie Williams, the wedding planner, that I first glimpsed the true scope of the Martinez family influence. Sophie was explaining the various package options when her phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID and immediately excused herself, stepping away to take what was clearly an important call. When she returned, she was practically glowing. "I'm so sorry about that," she said, settling back into her chair across from David and me. "That was Carlos Rodriguez, the venue manager. He wanted me to let you know that anything you need for your wedding, anything at all, is going to be taken care of. He said the Martinez family has been incredibly good to this venue over the years, and he wants to make sure your day is absolutely perfect." David smiled modestly, but I caught the slight flush in his cheeks. "Carlos is being too generous," he said. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My family has just hosted a few events here over the years. Sophie laughed, a sound filled with genuine affection. "David, honey, your family doesn't just host events here. Your family is the reason this place exists. When the original owners were going to sell to developers 5 years ago, your parents stepped in and bought the property. They completely renovated it, turned it into what it is today, and then hired the original owners to manage it because they didn't want them to lose their livelihood." I stared at David, who was now definitely blushing. "You didn't mention that your family owned the venue," I said quietly. "I wanted you to choose it because you loved it," he replied, reaching for my hand. "Not because of any family connection. When we walked through here the first time and I saw your face light up in the garden, I knew this was where we were supposed to get married. The fact that my parents happen to own it is just a happy coincidence. That evening, as we drove home, through the desert landscape that had become the backdrop to our love story, I felt a contentment I hadn't experienced since childhood. I was marrying a man who came from a family that built beautiful things instead of tearing others down, who supported each other instead of competing, who welcomed me with open arms instead of looking for reasons to exclude me. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was joining something that would make me better instead of smaller. But Patricia wasn't done with me yet. The incidents started small, so subtle that I almost convinced myself I was imagining them. A vendor would call to confirm details we had never discussed, saying that Mrs. Chen had contacted them with changes. The florist called to verify that we wanted to switch from the garden roses we had selected to carnations, because Patricia had told them we were looking to scale back our budget. The caterer left a voicemail asking about the menu change from the elegant dinner we had planned to a buffet-style service, because my mother had explained that we wanted something more casual. Each time, I called the vendor back, explained that there had been a misunderstanding, and restored our original plans. Each time, I told myself that Patricia was just trying to be helpful, that maybe she had misunderstood something I had said about the wedding preparations. Each time, I gave her the benefit of the doubt, because I wanted so desperately to believe that my mother wanted my happiness more than she wanted control. David noticed the stress I was carrying, though I tried to hide it. He would find me at my kitchen table at midnight, surrounded by vendor contracts and wedding planning binders, double-checking every detail to make sure nothing else had been changed without my knowledge. He would sit beside me, help me organize the paperwork, and remind me that in just a few months, we would be married and starting our own family traditions. "Maybe we should have a conversation with your mother," he suggested gently one evening, as I worked through my checklist for the 100th time, just to make sure everyone's on the same page about the wedding plans. I looked up from my notes, seeing the concern in his dark eyes. David was the most diplomatic person I knew, someone who could navigate difficult conversations with grace and find common ground with almost anyone. But Patricia had a talent for finding people's weak spots and pressing on them until they broke. I had spent 28 years learning how to protect myself from her particular brand of emotional warfare. I wasn't sure David was ready for what that conversation might unleash. "Let me handle her," I said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "She's just excited about the wedding. Once she sees how everything comes together, she'll understand." But deep down, I knew Patricia's behavior wasn't about excitement or misunderstanding. It was about control, about her need to be the center of attention, about her inability to let me have something beautiful without inserting herself into the middle of it. I had seen this pattern play out throughout my childhood. The way she would volunteer to help with school projects and then take them over completely. The way she would offer to plan my birthday parties and then invite more of her friends than mine. The way she would buy me clothes that she liked instead of asking what I wanted to wear. The difference now was that I wasn't a child anymore. I had built a successful business by learning how to anticipate problems, create backup plans, and protect my clients from the kind of chaos that Patricia seemed to thrive on. Without fully realizing it, I began applying those same skills to my wedding planning. I started creating redundant systems, confirming details directly with vendors instead of trusting any intermediaries, and documenting every conversation in writing. What I didn't anticipate was how far Patricia would be willing to go to maintain her control. The real escalation began 6 weeks before the wedding, when Patricia called me on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing a marketing proposal for a new client. Her voice had that particular sweetness that always preceded her most destructive behavior. "Jessica, darling," she began, "I've been thinking about your wedding, and I'm worried that you might be in over your head with all these details. Why don't you let me take care of some of the vendor management? I have so much more experience with these kinds of events." I set down my coffee and chose my words carefully. "Thank you for offering, Mom, but David and I have everything under control. Sophie, Our wedding planner has been amazing, and all the vendors are confirmed. Sophie Williams? Patricia's voice sharpened slightly. Oh, honey, I've heard some concerning things about her reliability. Are you sure you wouldn't be better off with someone more established? I know a woman who planned the Henderson wedding last year. You remember, the one that was in the society pages? The Henderson wedding had been a gaudy display that looked more like a furniture showroom than a celebration of love, but I knew better than to say that. Sophie comes highly recommended by Sunset Gardens Estate, and we're very happy with her work. Well, Patricia said, her tone shifting to the martyred patience she used when she felt I was being unreasonable. I just hope you know what you're doing. It would be such a shame if something went wrong because you were too proud to accept help from your own mother. After I hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, staring out at the Phoenix skyline and trying to shake the feeling that Patricia's offer of help was actually a threat. I had learned to trust my instincts about people through years of running my own business, and every instinct I had was telling me that my mother was planning something that would go far beyond rearranging flower orders. That afternoon, I did something I had never done before. I called David at work and asked if we could meet for coffee. When he arrived at the little cafe near my office, I could see the concern in his face immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked, sliding into the booth across from me. "I need to tell you something about my mother," I began, and then I found myself explaining years of Patricia's behavior, the subtle manipulations, the way she undermined my confidence, the pattern of inserting herself into my achievements, and somehow making them about her. David listened without judgment, occasionally reaching across the table to touch my hand, his expression growing more serious as the story unfolded. "Jessica," he said quietly when I finished, "why didn't you tell me this before?" I looked down, at my hands, feeling the familiar shame that came with admitting that my own mother was the source of so much pain in my life. Because I kept thinking that maybe this time would be different. Maybe with something as important as our wedding, she would want me to be happy more than she wanted to be in control. David was quiet for a moment, considering his words. "What do you want to do?" "I want to protect our wedding," I said, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. "I want to make sure that our day is about us, about our love, about the family we're creating together. I don't want to spend our wedding wondering what she's going to do next." "Then that's what we'll do," David said simply. "Whatever you need to feel safe and confident about our wedding, we'll make it happen." That evening, I began putting together what I privately called my wedding security plan. I created a detailed timeline with specific contact information for every vendor, gave copies to David, Sophie, and Emma Thompson, my best friend who was serving as my maid of honor. I sent follow-up emails to all our vendors, confirming that only Sophie, David, or I were authorized to make changes to our arrangements. I even spoke with Carlos Rodriguez, the venue manager, to let him know that we were concerned about unauthorized changes being made to our event. Carlos was incredibly understanding and professional. "Don't worry, Jessica," he said warmly. "We've been in this business long enough to know that family dynamics can sometimes complicate wedding planning. We'll make sure that everything goes exactly as you and David have planned it." For a few weeks, my precautions seemed to be working. Patricia made a few more attempts to insert herself into the planning process, but the vendors now directed all her calls back to Sophie or to me. She complained to my father about my secretiveness regarding the wedding details, but Richard gently suggested that she let me handle my own wedding planning. I began to relax, thinking that perhaps I had been overly paranoid, that Patricia would ultimately respect the boundaries I had established. I should have known better. 3 days before the wedding, I arrived at Sunset Gardens Estate for our final walkthrough with Sophie. It was a beautiful October morning, with the desert, air crisp and clean, and the gardens at their autumn peak. David was meeting me there after finishing up some work at his office, and I was looking forward to seeing everything come together for what would be our perfect day. Instead, I walked into absolute devastation. The sight that greeted me when I walked through the wrought iron gates of Sunset Gardens estate defied comprehension. Tables that had been perfectly arranged the day before were overturned, their white linens stained with mud and torn. The sound system we had spent weeks selecting lay in pieces across the flagstone terrace, speakers crushed as if someone had taken a sledgehammer to them. The archway where David and I were supposed to exchange vows had been stripped of its climbing roses, leaving behind bare metal framework that looked like the skeleton of something once beautiful. But it was the gardens themselves that made my breath catch in my throat. Someone had taken garden shears to the carefully maintained hedges, leaving jagged, ugly cuts that would take years to grow back. The fountain that served as the centerpiece of the ceremony space was clogged with debris, its water murky and stagnant. Rose petals that should have been scattered romantically along the aisle were instead ground into the walkway, creating a carpet of brown mush that squelched under my feet as I walked deeper into the destruction. Patricia stood in the center of it all, surveying her handiwork with the satisfaction of an artist admiring a completed masterpiece. She had clearly dressed for the occasion, wearing her best cream blazer and the pearl necklace that had belonged to my grandmother, as if she were attending a charity luncheon rather than standing amid the ruins of her own daughter's wedding venue. When she saw me approaching, her face lit up with that particular smile she reserved for moments when she felt she had proven a point. Behind her stood a man I didn't recognize, wearing work clothes and holding a clipboard. He looked uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot as if he regretted whatever role he had played in this destruction. Near the damaged fountain, I could see Sophie Williams talking rapidly into her phone, her usually composed demeanor cracked with stress and disbelief. "Oh, good, you're here," Patricia said cheerfully, as if she had been waiting for me to arrive at a perfectly normal family gathering. "I wanted you to see this before we started making calls about alternative arrangements. This venue clearly isn't suitable for a wedding of our caliber." I stood perfectly still, taking in every detail of the damage while something cold and calculating settled in my chest. This wasn't random vandalism or an accident. This was systematic, deliberate destruction designed to force me into a position where I would have to accept whatever alternative Patricia had already arranged. The timing was too precise, the damage too specific. Someone had planned this assault on my wedding with military precision. "What did you do?" I asked quietly, my voice carrying none of the hysteria that Patricia was clearly expecting. Her smile widened, and I could see the gleam of triumph in her eyes. "I saved you from making a terrible mistake, Jessica. I had this place inspected by a professional, and the safety violations are extensive. The electrical systems are outdated. The structural integrity of the event spaces is questionable, and the catering facilities don't meet current health department standards. I couldn't let you put your guests at risk just because you were too stubborn to listen to reason." The man with the clipboard cleared his throat nervously. "Ma'am, I should clarify that we were hired to conduct a standard pre-event safety inspection. Not to—" "Thank you, Mr. Morrison," Patricia interrupted smoothly. "I'm sure you have other appointments to get to. We'll handle things from here." Morrison looked like he wanted to say more, but Patricia's dismissive tone made it clear that his services were no longer required. He gathered his equipment and hurried toward the parking area, leaving Patricia and me alone amid the wreckage of my wedding dreams. Sophie finished her phone call and approached us, her face pale with shock. "Jessica, I am so incredibly sorry. I've never seen anything like this in 15 years of wedding planning. The venue was perfect yesterday during our final checks. I have no idea how this could have happened overnight." Patricia stepped forward. Before I could respond, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Oh, Sophie, dear. I'm afraid this isn't something that happened overnight. These problems have been building for months." I tried to warn Jessica, but she was determined to have her wedding here despite the obvious red flags. Thank goodness I'd discovered these issues before the actual ceremony. I watched Sophie's confusion deepen as she tried to process Patricia's explanation. Sophie had been to this venue dozens of times over the years. She knew every inch of the property, every vendor, every staff member. She knew that what Patricia was saying made no sense, but she was too professional to directly contradict the mother of the bride in front of me. "I think there might be some confusion about what happened here," Sophie said carefully. "This venue has an excellent safety record and all current certifications. The damage we're seeing appears to be recent and quite deliberate." Patricia's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of annoyance crossing her features before she regained her composure. "Well, regardless of when it happened, the fact remains that we can't possibly hold a wedding here in this condition. Fortunately, I've been working with a wonderful event coordinator at the Desert Rose Resort, and they've agreed to accommodate us this weekend. It will mean some adjustments to our original plans, but at least our guests won't be subjected to this disaster." There it was, the real purpose behind this destruction. Patricia hadn't just sabotaged my venue out of spite or control issues. She had orchestrated this entire scenario to force me into accepting her alternative arrangements, to make me dependent on her solutions, to ensure that my wedding would become her event with her choices and her vendors and her vision of what my life should look like. For 28 years, I had been trained to respond to Patricia's manipulations with compliance or emotional breakdown. She expected me to dissolve into tears, to thank her for saving the day, to gratefully accept whatever second-rate alternative she had arranged at the last minute. She was counting on my desperation, my desire to have some kind of wedding rather than no wedding at all. Instead, I pulled out my phone and made a call that would change everything. "Carlos? It's Jessica Chen. I'm standing in the ruins of what used to be my wedding venue, and I need you to get here immediately. Bring whoever you need to document this damage and call the police. Someone has committed vandalism on Martinez hospitality, group property, and I want them prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." Patricia's triumphant expression faltered for the first time since I had arrived. "Jessica, don't be ridiculous. There's no need to involve the authorities in a simple safety issue." I held up one finger to silence her while I continued my conversation with Carlos. "Yes, I know exactly who is responsible for this damage. Yes, I want to press charges. And Carlos? Call David's father, Roberto, immediately. Tell him that someone has destroyed his property in an attempt to sabotage his son's wedding, and that I have every intention of making sure they pay for every penny of damage plus punitive costs." The color drained from Patricia's face as the implications of my phone call began to sink in. For the first time, she seemed to realize that she might have made a serious miscalculation. "Jessica, surely we can discuss this rationally without involving lawyers and insurance companies. I was only trying to help." I ended my call and looked directly at my mother, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time in my adult life. Patricia Chen was a woman who had spent so many years manipulating situations to her advantage that she had forgotten other people might have resources and connections of their own. She had been so focused on controlling me that she had never bothered to truly understand the family I was marrying into or the implications of attacking their property. "You destroyed a venue owned by the Martinez family," I said calmly. "You hired someone to come onto their property and cause tens of thousands of dollars in damage to force me to accept your alternative wedding arrangements. You committed felony vandalism against one of the most respected business families in Phoenix, and you did it 3 days before their son's wedding." Sophie was staring at me with dawning comprehension. "The Martinez family owns Sunset Gardens estate? David's family." "David's parents bought this property 5 years ago and invested over $2 million in renovations to create what you see here. Or rather, what you saw here before my mother decided to destroy it." I gestured toward the overturned tables and damaged landscaping. Every plant that was cut, every piece of equipment that was smashed, every table that was overturned, represents an attack on David's family's business and livelihood. Patricia's breathing had become shallow, and I could see her mind racing as she tried to find a way to minimize the consequences of what she had done. "I didn't know the Martinez family owned this place. You never told me that David's family was in the hospitality business." "I shouldn't have needed to tell you," I replied. "You shouldn't have hired someone to destroy my wedding venue regardless of who owned it. But the fact that you didn't bother to research the property before vandalizing it just proves how little thought you put into the consequences of your actions." The sound of vehicles approaching interrupted our conversation. Carlos Rodriguez arrived first, driving a company pickup truck and accompanied by two other men I didn't recognize. Behind them came a police cruiser, followed by what appeared to be an insurance investigator based on the documentation equipment visible through his car windows. Carlos took one look at the destruction, and his face hardened with professional anger. "Mrs. Chen, I presume?" he said, addressing Patricia with icy politeness. "I'm Carlos Rodriguez, General Manager of Sunset Gardens Estate. Would you mind explaining to me how you gained access to this property and who authorized you to bring contractors onto the premises?" Patricia straightened her shoulders and attempted to reclaim her earlier confidence. "I had the property inspected for safety violations as a concerned mother. What we found was so alarming that immediate action was required to prevent potential injury to wedding guests. Ma'am, this property undergoes monthly safety inspections by licensed professionals as required by state regulations. We have never had a safety violation in 5 years of operation. What you've done here isn't a safety inspection. It's criminal vandalism." Carlos gestured toward Morrison's retreating figure. "And if you hired that man to cause this damage, you've involved him in felony destruction of property." The police officers approached our group, notebook already in hand. "I'm going to need to speak with everyone who was present when this damage occurred, and I'll need documentation of the current state of the property before anything is moved or cleaned up." As the officer began taking statements, I watched Patricia's carefully constructed narrative begin to crumble. Morrison, when questioned, admitted that he had been hired by Patricia to conduct what she called an aggressive inspection of the property, but that he had expected to find genuine safety issues that would justify his actions. When he realized that the venue was actually in excellent condition, he had tried to limit the scope of the damage, but Patricia had insisted that he continue with the plan. The insurance investigator estimated the total damage at over $85,000, including the destroyed sound equipment, damaged landscaping that would take years to restore, and the revenue loss from having to cancel other events while repairs were completed. When Patricia heard that figure, she actually swayed on her feet, clutching at her pearl necklace as if it could somehow anchor her to a reality where her actions didn't have serious financial consequences. $85,000? She whispered. "But I was told this would just be minor cosmetic damage that could be fixed quickly." Carlos looked at her with disgust. "Ma'am, you hired someone to destroy mature landscaping that took decades to establish, commercial-grade audio equipment worth more than most people's cars, and custom stonework that was designed specifically for this property. There is nothing minor or cosmetic about what you've done here." David arrived just as the police officer was explaining to Patricia that she would be charged with felony vandalism and conspiracy to commit property destruction. I watched my fiancé take in the scene. The destroyed gardens, the overturned furniture, his future mother-in-law in handcuffs, and I saw something in his expression that I had never seen before. David was the most even-tempered person I knew, someone who could find diplomatic solutions to almost any conflict. But as he surveyed the destruction of his family's property, his face reflected a cold anger that made my heart race. "Carlos, what's our liability insurance situation for something like this?" David asked, his voice professionally controlled despite the fury I could see in his eyes. "We're fully covered for the repairs, but this is going to be a complicated claim because of the deliberate nature of the damage. The insurance company will want to pursue full restitution from the responsible parties, including punitive damages, for the malicious destruction." David nodded grimly. Good. I want them to pursue every legal remedy available. This isn't just vandalism. It's an attack on our family's business and reputation. Patricia, now sitting in the back of the police cruiser, looked like she was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what she had done. This wasn't a family dispute that could be smoothed over with apologies and compromises. This was a criminal matter that would involve lawyers, court appearances, and financial consequences that could destroy her carefully maintained lifestyle. As the police car pulled away with my mother inside, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete clarity about my relationship with Patricia and my responsibilities to protect the family I was creating with David. For too long, I had enabled her behavior by accepting it, making excuses for it, and allowing her to believe that her manipulations were effective. Sophie approached me as the various officials finished documenting the scene. Jessica, I know this seems impossible right now, but we still have options for your wedding. I've been making calls while the police were here, and I held up my hand to stop her. Sophie, I appreciate everything you're trying to do, but I need you to know something. We're not changing venues. We're getting married here, at Sunset Gardens Estate, exactly as planned. Sophie looked around at the destruction surrounding us. But Jessica, there's no way this can be restored in 3 days. The damage is too extensive. David stepped beside me and took my hand. Actually, it can be restored. My family has crews that specialize in emergency renovations for our hospitality properties. We've dealt with everything from hurricane damage to kitchen fires, and we've never missed an event date yet. Carlos nodded in agreement. We can have restoration crews here within 2 hours. The landscaping will take longer to grow back, but we can install temporary arrangements that will be even more beautiful than what was here before. The sound system can be replaced with better equipment than what was destroyed. And the furniture and linens were all rentals that can be reordered for immediate delivery. I looked around at the ruins of what had been my perfect venue and realized that Patricia's attempt to destroy my wedding had actually given me something I had never expected: absolute clarity about who belonged in my life and who didn't. Then, that's what we'll do. We'll rebuild everything better than it was before, and we'll do it without her. As the sun set over the desert landscape that evening, I stood in my downtown Phoenix loft and made a series of phone calls that would reshape my family dynamics permanently. The first call was to my father to explain what had happened and why Patricia would not be attending our wedding. Richard listened in shocked silence as I described the day's events, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Jessica, I knew your mother could be controlling, but I never imagined she would do something this destructive. I'm so sorry. Dad, you don't need to apologize for her choices, but I need you to understand that this changes things between us. I can't have someone in my life who would destroy my happiness just to prove a point. What does this mean? For our family? I looked out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering darkness. It means that you have to choose, Dad. You can have a relationship with me and David and whatever family we build together, or you can continue enabling Patricia's behavior. But you can't do both anymore. The second call was to my sister, Amanda, who had been planning to drive down from Flagstaff for the wedding weekend. When I explained what had happened, she was silent for so long that I thought the call had dropped. Amanda, are you there? I'm here. I'm just trying to process the fact that our mother hired someone to destroy your wedding venue. That's not normal family dysfunction, Jess. That's criminal behavior. I know, and I need to know that you understand why she can't be part of our lives anymore. I understand. I've watched her tear you down for years, and I've felt guilty for not speaking up more often. Maybe this is the wake-up call our family needed. The third call was the most difficult. I dialed Patricia's cell phone, knowing that she had probably been released on bail by now and was likely at home trying to figure out how to spin this situation to her advantage. Jessica? Her voice was small and uncertain. Nothing like the confident woman who had stood among the ruins of my wedding venue just hours earlier. I'm calling to let you know that you are not welcome at my wedding, and you are not welcome in my life going forward. What you did today was unforgivable. Sweetheart, please let me explain. I was just trying to protect you from making a mistake. That venue wasn't suitable for— Stop talking, I said calmly. Nothing you can say will change what you did or undo the damage you caused. You destroyed my wedding venue to try to force me to accept your alternatives. You committed felony vandalism against David's family's property. You hired someone to help you cause $85,000 in damage because you couldn't accept that I had made my own choices about my own wedding. Patricia's voice became pleading. But I'm your mother. We can work through this. Families forgive each other. You can't just cut me out of your life over one mistake. This wasn't one mistake, Mom. This was the culmination of 28 years of you trying to control every aspect of my life. The difference is that now I'm strong enough to stop you. I hung up before she could respond and immediately blocked her number. Then I sat in the quiet of my apartment and felt something I had never experienced before: complete peace about a decision involving my mother. Over the next 3 days, I watched David's family demonstrate what real family support looked like. Maria Martinez arrived at Sunset Gardens Estate the morning after the vandalism with a team of landscapers, event coordinators, and restoration specialists. She didn't come to take over or to impose her vision on my wedding. She came to ask what I needed and how she could help make my dream wedding happen despite the obstacles Patricia had created. Roberto showed up with replacement sound equipment that was actually better than what had been destroyed, and when I tried to discuss payment, he waved me off. Jessica, you're going to be our daughter in 3 days. This is what family does for each other. Miguel, David's brother, spent hours working with the landscaping crew to create temporary garden arrangements that were more stunning than the original plantings. Emma Thompson, my best friend and maid of honor, coordinated with Sophie to ensure that every detail was perfect, from the relocated ceremony space to the backup power generators that would ensure nothing could disrupt our celebration. By Friday evening, Sunset Gardens Estate looked like a completely different venue. The damaged areas had been transformed into something even more beautiful than what Patricia had destroyed. The ceremony space had been moved to a more intimate section of the gardens, surrounded by flowering trees and overlooking a small pond that reflected the desert sunset. The reception area featured upgraded lighting and sound systems that made the entire space feel magical. As I stood in the bridal suite, putting the finishing touches on my makeup, I realized that Patricia's attempt to ruin my wedding had actually given me the most precious gift imaginable: absolute clarity about the difference between people who loved me and people who wanted to control me. Sophie knocked on the door and peeked inside. Jessica, you look absolutely radiant. Are you ready for the most beautiful wedding Phoenix has ever seen? I looked at myself in the mirror one final time, seeing not the anxious, people-pleasing daughter I had been for so many years, but a confident woman who had learned to protect what mattered most to her. I've never been more ready for anything in my life. The morning of my wedding dawned clear and perfect, with the kind of desert sunshine that made everything look like it had been touched by gold. I woke up in the presidential suite at the Phoenician Resort, where Maria Martinez had insisted I spend my final night as a single woman, surrounded by my closest friends and the kind of luxury that felt like a warm embrace rather than a display of wealth. Emma Thompson was already awake when I opened my eyes, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee and a smile that could have powered the entire city. "Good morning, Mrs. Martinez," she said softly, testing out the name that would be mine in just a few hours. I stretched and felt something I hadn't experienced in months of wedding planning: complete contentment. There were no last-minute crises to manage, no vendor emergencies to solve, no Patricia to worry about disrupting the day. For the first time since David had proposed, I could simply focus on the joy of marrying the man I loved. My phone had been buzzing intermittently since dawn. But I had given Emma strict instructions to screen all calls and only wake me for true emergencies. As I sipped the perfect cup of coffee that room service had delivered with my breakfast, Emma handed me a summary of the messages that had come in overnight. "Your father called 3 times," she reported, settling into the chair across from my bed. "He wants to walk you down the aisle, and he's apparently spent the entire night thinking about what you said to him about choosing sides. He left a voicemail, saying that he's already filed for divorce from Patricia and that he wants to rebuild his relationship with you." I felt a complex mix of emotions hearing this news. Part of me was relieved that Richard had finally recognized the toxicity of his marriage to Patricia, but another part of me wondered if it was too little, too late. What else? Amanda called to confirm that she'll be here in 2 hours with your niece Lucy, who is apparently beside herself with excitement about being the flower girl. Your wedding planner Sophie called to confirm that everything at the venue is absolutely perfect and that the Martinez family's restoration team worked actual miracles. And Emma paused dramatically. Your mother called 17 times from various phone numbers, all of which I declined to answer per your instructions. I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders at the confirmation that Patricia's attempts to insert herself back into my wedding day were being successfully blocked. Anything else I need to know about? David's family has been calling all morning, but only with the good kind of messages. Maria wants to know if you need anything at all. Roberto is confirming the timeline for the father-daughter dance you two planned as a surprise for David, and Miguel is reporting that the venue looks like something out of a fairy tale. As if summoned by our conversation, there was a soft knock at the suite door. Emma went to answer it and returned with Maria Martinez, who was carrying what appeared to be an antique jewelry box and wearing the kind of radiant smile that made everyone around her feel like they were part of something magical. "Good morning, my beautiful daughter," Maria said, settling onto the edge of my bed with the familiarity of someone who had always been part of my family. "I brought you something that I've been saving for this day since David first told me he was going to marry you." She opened the jewelry box to reveal a stunning set of diamond earrings and a matching necklace that sparkled with the kind of fire that only comes from stones that have been cherished for generations. These belonged to David's great-grandmother, who came to this country with nothing but determination and the dream of building something beautiful for her family. She wore them on her wedding day, and I wore them on mine, and now I want you to wear them on yours. I felt tears welling up as I realized that Maria was offering me something infinitely more valuable than expensive jewelry. She was making me part of a legacy, connecting me to a family history of strong women who had built lives of meaning and substance. "Maria, I can't accept something so precious." "Jessica, you're not accepting them. You're inheriting them. You're going to be David's wife and the mother of my future grandchildren, and that makes you the keeper of our family's treasures." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "Besides, these earrings have been waiting 28 years for a woman worthy of wearing them, and I can't think of anyone more deserving than the woman who stood up to protect our family's property and David's happiness." As Maria fastened the necklace around my neck, I caught sight of myself in the mirror across the room. The woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the anxious, approval-seeking daughter who had spent years walking on eggshells around Patricia. This woman looked confident, loved, and ready to step into a future built on mutual respect and genuine family bonds. Emma began the process of transforming me into a bride, starting with a makeup artist who had been recommended by the Martinez family and who approached her work like she was creating a masterpiece. As she worked, we talked about the incredible restoration that had taken place at Sunset Gardens Estate over the past 3 days. "I've been doing wedding makeup for 15 years, the artist said as she applied foundation with the precision of a Renaissance painter. "And I've never seen anything like what that family accomplished. When I arrived yesterday for the rehearsal, I couldn't believe that the same venue had been vandalized just days before. Everything looked like it had been designed specifically for your wedding." The transformation of the venue was just one part of what had become a much larger story. Word had somehow gotten out about Patricia's sabotage attempt and the Martinez family's incredible response, and the local wedding industry had rallied around our celebration in a way that moved me to tears every time I thought about it. The florist had donated additional arrangements beyond what we had originally ordered, saying that she wanted to contribute to the most romantic comeback story she had ever been part of. The photographer had upgraded our package to include additional hours and a second shooter, explaining that she wanted to document every moment of what she was calling the wedding that love built. Even the caterer had added special touches to our menu, including a dessert course that he had created specifically to celebrate our triumph over adversity. As the morning progressed, I began to understand that my wedding had become something larger than just a celebration of David's and my commitment to each other. It had become a testament to the power of choosing family based on love and respect rather than biological obligation, and to the importance of protecting the people and relationships that truly mattered. Amanda arrived right on schedule with my 4-year-old niece Lucy, who was so excited about her role as flower girl that she had been practicing her walk for weeks. When Lucy saw me in my wedding dress, her eyes grew wide with wonder. "Aunt Jessica, you look like a princess," she exclaimed, clapping her hands together. "Are you going to live in a castle now?" I knelt down to her level, careful not to wrinkle my dress, and took her small hands in mine. "I'm going to live with Uncle David in our own home, and we're going to build our own kind of fairy tale together." Amanda watched this exchange with tears in her eyes. Later, as we were alone for a few minutes while Lucy was getting her hair done, my sister took my hands and spoke words that I had been waiting to hear for years. "Jess, I owe you an apology. I've watched Mom treat you terribly for years, and I never spoke up strongly enough because I was afraid of becoming her target. But watching what she did to your wedding venue, seeing how the Martinez family responded, and seeing how strong and confident you've become, I realized that I should have supported you a long time ago." I squeezed her hands, feeling a bond with my sister that had been strained by years of navigating Patricia's manipulations. "Amanda, you don't need to apologize. We were both trying to survive in a difficult situation. What matters is that we're here now, supporting each other. I want you to know that I'm done enabling Mom's behavior. What she did wasn't just wrong. It was criminal, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise to keep peace in the family anymore." As we prepared to leave for the venue, I took one last look around the hotel suite that had served as my sanctuary for the final preparations. In just a few hours, I would be married to David in a ceremony that would be more beautiful than anything I had originally imagined, surrounded by people who genuinely loved and supported us. The drive to Sunset Gardens estate felt like a procession of joy. Emma had arranged for a vintage Rolls-Royce to transport me to the venue, and as we drove through the desert landscape that had become the backdrop to my love story, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this moment. When we arrived at the venue, I was overwhelmed by what the Martinez family and their team had accomplished. The gardens looked like something from a dream, with thousands of twinkling lights woven through the trees and flowers that seemed to glow in the late afternoon sunshine. The ceremony space had been transformed into an intimate amphitheater surrounded by flowering bushes and overlooking a small waterfall that hadn't been there 3 days earlier. Carlos Rodriguez met us at the bridal suite that had been set up in a charming cottage on the property grounds. "Jessica, you look absolutely stunning," he said warmly. David is beside himself with excitement, and I have to tell you that this is the most beautiful wedding setup we've ever created at Sunset Gardens Estate. As I settled into the bridal suite for final touch-ups, Sophie Williams arrived with a clipboard and the kind of serene confidence that only comes from having every detail perfectly organized. "Jessica, we are exactly on schedule. Every vendor is in place, your guests are being seated, and David looks like the happiest man in Arizona. Are you ready to become Mrs. Martinez?" Through the cottage window, I could see guests arriving and being seated in the ceremony space. David's extended family had flown in from all over the country, and I was moved to see how many of my own friends and colleagues had made the trip to Phoenix to celebrate with us. Even some of my business clients had come, including the CEO of a tech startup who had specifically told me that she wouldn't have missed the wedding of the woman who revolutionized our marketing strategy for anything. What struck me most was the feeling of genuine celebration that seemed to emanate from everyone present. These weren't people who had come out of obligation or social expectation. These were people who truly wanted to witness and celebrate the love that David and I shared, and who understood that they were part of something special. 20 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, there was a soft knock at the B cottage door. Emma went to answer it and returned with a slightly nervous expression. "Jessica, your father is here. He's asking if he can speak with you for just a moment before the ceremony begins." I hesitated, unsure whether I was ready for an emotional conversation with Richard so close to the ceremony. But something in Emma's expression suggested that this might be important. "Send him in," I decided. Richard entered the cottage looking like he had aged years in just the past few days. He was impeccably dressed in the tuxedo we had selected months earlier, but his eyes carried a weight that I had never seen before. He stopped just inside the door, as if he was afraid to come too close. "Jessica, you look absolutely beautiful," he said softly, "just like your grandmother did on her wedding day." "Thank you, Dad." He took a tentative step forward. "I need to say something before you walk down that aisle, and I need you to know that I don't expect forgiveness or understanding. I just need you to hear this." I nodded for him to continue. "Your mother's behavior at this wedding venue was inexcusable, but it wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of years of me enabling her to treat you badly because I was too weak to stand up for you. I watched her undermine your confidence, dismiss your achievements, and try to control your life, and I told myself that keeping peace in our marriage was more important than protecting my daughter." Richard's voice broke slightly as he continued. "I filed for divorce yesterday morning, not because of what happened at your venue, but because I finally realized that I had failed as your father. I chose loyalty to a toxic marriage over defending the incredible woman you've become, and I will regret that for the rest of my life." I felt tears threatening to ruin my makeup, but I also felt something else, a sense of closure about my relationship with my father that I hadn't expected to find on my wedding day. "Dad, I'm glad you've made that choice, but I need you to understand that rebuilding our relationship is going to take time. I can't just forget years of feeling like you didn't have my back." "I understand completely," he replied. "I'm not asking for immediate forgiveness. I'm just asking for the chance to prove that I can be the father you deserve, even if it takes years to earn that privilege back." We stood in silence for a moment, and then Richard reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small wrapped box. "This belonged to your grandmother, my mother. She always said it should go to the first granddaughter who was strong enough to build her own life on her own terms. I think she would have been very proud of the woman you've become." Inside the box was a delicate gold bracelet with a small charm in the shape of a phoenix. I had never seen it before, but something about it felt familiar, as if it had been waiting for me my entire life. She always said that a phoenix doesn't just rise from ashes. It uses those ashes to build something stronger and more beautiful than what came before. Richard's eyes met mine. "That's what you've done, Jessica. You've taken everything painful from your childhood and used it to become someone extraordinary." As Richard fastened the bracelet around my wrist, I realized that this conversation was giving me something I hadn't known I needed: the knowledge that not everyone in my original family had been lost to Patricia's toxicity. My father had made serious mistakes, but he was acknowledging them and taking concrete steps to change. "Are you ready to walk me down the aisle, Dad?" I asked. His face lit up with the first genuine smile I had seen from him in years. "It would be the greatest honor of my life. Sophie appeared in the doorway with a radiant smile. "It's time, Jessica. Your groom is waiting, your guests are seated, and the sunset is absolutely perfect." As we made our way to the ceremony space, I could hear the string quartet playing the processional music that David and I had selected. Through the trees, I caught glimpses of the guests who had gathered to celebrate with us, and I felt overwhelmed by the love and support that surrounded us. Amanda and Emma had already walked down the aisle as my bridesmaids, followed by little Lucy, who had performed her flower girl duties with the solemnity of someone entrusted with a very important mission. Now it was my turn to walk toward the future I had chosen for myself. As Richard and I approached the ceremony space, I could see David waiting for me at the altar, surrounded by the restored gardens that had been transformed into something even more beautiful than what Patricia had tried to destroy. He was wearing the charcoal gray tuxedo that made his dark eyes sparkle, and when he saw me, his face lit up with such pure joy that I felt my heart skip a beat. Standing beside David were Miguel as his best man, and Roberto and Carlos as his groomsmen, representing the family and community that had rallied around us during our darkest moment. Behind them, the restored archway was covered in climbing, roses and twinkling lights, creating a backdrop that looked like something from a fairy tale. But it was the look in David's eyes as I walked toward him that made everything else fade away. He was looking at me like I was the answer to every prayer he had ever made, like I was the missing piece that would make his life complete. In that moment, I understood that all the pain and struggle with Patricia had been worth it, because it had taught me to recognize and protect real love when I found it. As Richard placed my hand in David's and stepped back to take his seat, I felt the last piece of my old life fall away. I was no longer the daughter who bent herself into impossible shapes trying to earn conditional love. I was a woman who had learned to value herself enough to demand respect, to protect what mattered most, and to build a life based on mutual love and genuine partnership. The officiant began the ceremony with words about love triumphing over adversity, about the strength that comes from choosing to build something beautiful together, and about the importance of surrounding ourselves with people who support our highest and best selves. As he spoke, I looked out at the guests who had gathered to celebrate with us and realized that this wedding had become exactly what it was supposed to be. Not just a celebration of David's and my love, but a testament to the power of choosing family based on love rather than obligation. When it came time for our vows, David spoke first, his voice steady and sure despite the emotion I could see in his eyes. "Jessica, 3 days ago, someone tried to destroy our wedding venue because they couldn't accept that you had chosen your own path. What they didn't understand is that you are the strongest, most resilient woman I have ever known, and that attacking our celebration would only prove how much you mean to me and to everyone who truly knows you." He paused, his voice growing softer. "You could have let that destruction break you, or you could have accepted a lesser alternative to avoid conflict. Instead, you stood up for us, for our love, and for the life we're building together. You showed me and everyone here what it means to fight for what matters most. I promise to spend the rest of my life being worthy of that strength, supporting your dreams, and building a family where love is never conditional and respect is never negotiable." When it was my turn to speak, I looked into David's eyes and felt the words flow from my heart without hesitation. "David, when I met your family, I learned what it felt like to be valued for who I am, rather than criticized for who I'm not. You and your parents and Miguel showed me that families should lift each other up, celebrate each other's successes, and stand together when facing challenges." I glanced toward the guests, seeing the faces of people who had supported us through this crisis. 3 days ago, I watched your family respond to an attack on their property, not with anger or revenge, but with determination to create something even more beautiful than what had been destroyed. That response taught me everything I need to know about the family I'm joining and the values we'll pass on to our children. Looking back at David, I continued, "I promise to spend our marriage building the kind of family where everyone feels safe to be themselves, where achievements are celebrated rather than minimized, and where love is expressed through support rather than control. I promise to protect what we're building together and to never let anyone make you feel less than the extraordinary man you are. As we exchanged rings, I felt the weight of the family heirloom diamonds that Maria had given me that morning, connecting me to generations of strong women who had built meaningful lives despite facing their own challenges. The gold phoenix bracelet from my grandmother seemed to warm against my wrist, reminding me that I had indeed risen from the ashes of my toxic family dynamics to build something beautiful and strong. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, David's kiss felt like coming home to a place I had been searching for my entire life. The guests erupted in applause and cheers, but all I could focus on was the man I had just married and the incredible journey that had brought us to this moment. As we walked back down the aisle together as husband and wife, I caught sight of faces in the crowd that filled me with joy. Maria was crying happy tears. Roberto was beaming with pride. Amanda was grinning and wiping her eyes. And my father looked like he was seeing me clearly for the first time in years. Notably absent, of course, was Patricia, and her absence felt like a gift rather than a loss. For the first time in my life, I was celebrating a major milestone without having to worry about her criticism, her attempts to control the narrative, or her need to make everything about herself. The cocktail reception that followed was everything I had dreamed of and more. The restored gardens provided the perfect backdrop for photographs, and the Martinez family had arranged for mariachi musicians to serenade our guests as they enjoyed drinks and appetizers. The mood was festive and relaxed, with people genuinely enjoying themselves rather than going through the motions of obligatory celebration. As the sun began to set over the desert landscape, casting everything in golden light, David and I took a few moments alone to walk through the gardens where we would have our first dance as a married couple. The areas that had been destroyed just days earlier were now more beautiful than ever, filled with flowering plants and twinkling lights that created an atmosphere of pure magic. Do you think your mother has any idea what she actually accomplished? David asked as we paused beside the new waterfall that his family had installed. I considered the question seriously. I think she accomplished exactly the opposite of what she intended. She wanted to prove that I couldn't succeed without her control, but instead she proved that I'm strong enough to protect our marriage from anyone who tries to damage it. She wanted to force me to accept her alternatives, but instead, she gave me the opportunity to show everyone what the Martinez family values really mean. David pulled me closer, and I could see the lights from our reception twinkling through the trees. I love you, Mrs. Martinez. I love you too, Mr. Martinez. And I love the life we're going to build together. As we walked back toward our guests, I realized that Patricia's sabotage had given me something invaluable. Absolute certainty about the choices I had made and the family I had chosen. There would be challenges ahead. There would be difficult moments in our marriage, but I knew with complete confidence that David and I had the strength and support system to handle whatever came our way. The evening was just beginning, and I was ready to celebrate not just our wedding, but the beginning of a life built on love, respect, and the kind of family bonds that actually make each other stronger. The reception that followed our ceremony exceeded every dream I had harbored about our wedding celebration. As David and I were introduced as husband and wife for the first time, walking into the ballroom at Sunset Gardens Estate, I was struck by how the space had been transformed into something that felt both elegant and intimately personal. The Martinez family's restoration team had worked with Sophie Williams to create an atmosphere that perfectly captured our vision, while incorporating touches that honored both of our families' traditions. Round tables dressed in ivory linens were arranged throughout the space, each centerpiece featuring a unique combination of desert flowers and cascading greenery that seemed to bring the gardens indoors. The lighting had been designed to create warmth and romance, with hundreds of candles and string lights creating a golden glow that made everyone look radiant. The head table where David and I would sit with our wedding party was positioned to overlook the dance floor and the French doors that opened onto the restored gardens. As we made our way to our seats, I was overwhelmed by the genuine joy and celebration I saw on the faces of our guests. These weren't people going through the motions of wedding attendance out of social obligation. These were friends, family members, and colleagues who had come to Phoenix specifically to witness and celebrate our union, and many of whom had heard about the challenges we had faced and overcome in the days leading up to this moment. Emma Thompson, radiant in her sage green bridesmaid dress, stood to offer the first toast of the evening. She had been my closest friend since college, had watched me navigate years of complicated family dynamics, and had been instrumental in helping me recognize the difference between David's genuine love and the conditional approval I had grown up seeking from Patricia. "I've known Jessica for over a decade," Emma began, her voice carrying clearly throughout the ballroom. "And I've watched her build an incredibly successful business while always putting others' needs before her own. I've seen her accommodate impossible demands, make excuses for people who didn't deserve her loyalty, and somehow maintain her optimism and kindness despite being taken advantage of repeatedly." She paused, looking directly at David and me. "But I've never seen her as happy, as confident, or as genuinely herself as she has been since David became part of her life. David, you didn't just win Jessica's heart. You helped her remember her own worth. And Jessica, you found a partner who celebrates your strength instead of trying to diminish it." Emma raised her champagne glass higher. "To Jessica and David, who proved that the best revenge against people who try to tear you down is building something so beautiful that their negativity becomes irrelevant." The applause that followed Emma's toast was thunderous, and I felt tears of gratitude welling up as I realized how many people in this room had supported us through recent challenges. David squeezed my hand under the table, and when I looked at him, I saw my own emotions reflected in his dark eyes. Miguel Martinez stood next, representing David's side of the family. Where Emma's toast had been heartfelt and personal, Miguel's reflected the warmth and humor that characterized the Martinez family dynamics. "When David first told me he was going to marry Jessica," Miguel began with a grin, "I thought he was just being his usual optimistic self. David has always believed the best about people, sometimes to his own detriment. But when I met Jessica and saw how she challenged him intellectually, supported his dreams, and somehow managed to keep up with our family's chaos during Sunday dinners, I knew my brother had found his perfect match." Miguel's expression grew more serious. "This week, we all learned what Jessica is really made of. When someone attacked our family's property in an attempt to destroy their wedding, Jessica didn't break down or compromise her vision. She stood up for herself, for David, and for the values that our family holds dear. She showed us what it means to fight for what matters most." He raised his glass toward us. "To David and Jessica, who reminded us all that real family isn't just about blood relations. It's about choosing to support each other through whatever challenges life brings." As our guests enjoyed the dinner that Isabella Romano had prepared, I found myself moving from table to table, genuinely grateful for the opportunity to thank people for being part of our celebration. At a table near the windows, I stopped to speak with several of my business clients who had made the trip to Phoenix for our wedding. "Jessica, this is absolutely the most beautiful wedding I've ever attended," said Sarah Chen, the CEO of a tech startup whose marketing campaigns I had been managing for the past 2 years. "But more than that, hearing about what you went through this week and how you handled it, it makes me even more confident that we chose the right marketing strategist for our company." Her comment surprised me. I'm not sure I understand the connection. The same strategic thinking, problem-solving ability, and grace under pressure that you showed in protecting your wedding are exactly the qualities that have made our marketing campaigns so successful. You don't just react to problems, you anticipate them, prepare for them, and turn them into opportunities. At another table, I was greeted by Dr. Patricia Valdez, one of my father's longtime friends, and a woman who had known me since childhood. She stood up to embrace me, and I could see emotion in her eyes. "Jessica, I need to tell you something, she said quietly, glancing around to make sure we had relative privacy. Your father called me yesterday morning to tell me about his decision to divorce your mother. He also told me about what happened with your wedding venue. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I've watched your mother's behavior toward you for years, and I've always felt guilty for not speaking up more directly. As a family friend, I thought it wasn't my place to interfere in your family dynamics. But what she did this week crossed every line of decent behavior. Dr. Valdez took my hands in hers. I want you to know that you have support in the community beyond just your immediate family. There are people who have watched you grow into an extraordinary woman despite the challenges you faced at home, and we're all incredibly proud of the strength you've shown. Her words meant more to me than she could have known. Growing up, I had often felt isolated in my struggles with Patricia's behavior, wondering if other people could see what was happening or if I was being overly sensitive. Learning that family friends had recognized the dysfunction and respected my resilience gave me a sense of validation that I hadn't realized I needed. As the evening progressed, David and I had our first dance to At Last by Etta James, a song that felt perfect for our journey together. Dancing in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by the warm glow of candlelight and the faces of people who genuinely loved and supported us, I felt a profound sense of having arrived at exactly where I was meant to be. How does it feel to be Mrs. Martinez? David whispered in my ear as we swayed to the music. It feels like coming home, I replied, meaning every word. The dance floor filled gradually as other couples joined us, and I was touched to see my father dancing with Amanda, both of them looking more relaxed and happy than I had seen them in years. Miguel was spinning Lucy around in circles, making her giggle with delight, while Maria and Roberto danced with the easy familiarity of a couple who had been partners in every sense of the word for over 30 years. Around 10 o'clock, as the evening was reaching its peak energy with guests dancing to the music provided by the DJ David's family had recommended, Carlos Rodriguez approached me with a concerned expression that immediately put me on alert. Mrs. Martinez, he said quietly, I need to speak with you privately for just a moment. There's a situation that requires your attention. David noticed Carlos's serious demeanor and joined us as we stepped into a quiet alcove away from the celebration. What's going on, Carlos? Your mother is here, Carlos said, addressing me directly. She's in the parking area, and she's demanding to speak with you. She claims she has important legal documents that need to be signed tonight, and she's becoming increasingly agitated with our security staff. I felt my stomach drop, not because I was afraid of confronting Patricia, but because I was furious that she would attempt to disrupt our wedding reception after everything that had happened. How did she even know we were having the reception here? I thought she was supposed to be avoiding this property pending the criminal charges. I don't know how she found out about the reception location, Carlos replied, but she's technically not violating any court orders by being in the parking area. However, she cannot enter the venue itself, and our security team is prepared to call the police if she attempts to do so. David's jaw tightened with anger. What kind of legal documents could possibly be so urgent that they need to be addressed? On our wedding night? I knew exactly what this was about, and it had nothing to do with urgent legal matters. This was Patricia's final attempt to regain control over a situation that had completely escaped her influence. She couldn't accept that our wedding had proceeded without her, that it had been more beautiful than anything she could have planned, and that her absence had been a blessing rather than a loss. I'll go talk to her, I decided, surprising both David and Carlos with my calm determination. Jessica, you don't have to do that, David said immediately. This is our wedding night. You shouldn't have to deal with her drama. That's exactly why I need to deal with it now, I replied. If I don't establish clear boundaries tonight, she'll continue to find ways to insert herself into our lives whenever she wants attention or control. I need to end this once and for all. Carlos nodded approvingly. I'll have security escort you to the parking area and remain present during any conversation. And if you want her removed from the property at any point, just give me a signal." I kissed David softly. "Stay here and keep our guests entertained. I'll be back in 10 minutes and then we can get back to celebrating our marriage." The walk through the gardens to the parking area gave me time to prepare mentally for what I knew would be Patricia's final attempt to disrupt my happiness. As we approached the area where she was waiting, I could see her pacing beside her luxury sedan, dressed in a black cocktail dress that looked like she had been planning to attend our reception uninvited. When Patricia saw me approaching, her expression shifted from agitation to what she probably thought was maternal concern. "Jessica, thank goodness. I've been trying to reach you all day. There are urgent matters we need to discuss about the legal proceedings." I stopped about 6 feet away from her, close enough to speak normally, but far enough to maintain clear physical boundaries. "What legal matters, Patricia? Your criminal trial for vandalizing this property doesn't involve me except as a witness." "That's not what I'm referring to," she said, reaching into her purse and pulling out a folder of documents. "I've been meeting with attorneys about your father's ridiculous divorce filing, and there are financial implications that affect you directly." I almost laughed at the transparency of her manipulation attempt. "My father's decision to divorce? You has nothing to do with me, and any financial arrangements between the two of you are not my concern." Patricia's composure began to crack as she realized that her usual tactics weren't working. "Jessica, you can't just cut me out of your life like this. I'm your mother. I made mistakes, but everything I did was because I was trying to protect you. You hired someone to destroy my wedding venue because you couldn't accept that I had made my own choices about my own wedding. That wasn't protection. That was sabotage. I was trying to save you from making a mistake." Patricia's voice rose sharply, and I could see Carlos's security team moving closer in response to her agitation. That venue wasn't suitable, and David's family isn't the kind of people who will appreciate what you have to offer. The irony of her statement was almost overwhelming. David's family spent 3 days and tens of thousands of dollars rebuilding what you destroyed so that our wedding could proceed as planned. They welcomed me into their family without conditions or criticism. They celebrate my achievements instead of diminishing them. They're exactly the kind of people who appreciate what I have to offer." Patricia's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the rage and desperation that had been driving her behavior all along. "You think you're so much better than me now, don't you? You think that marrying into money makes you special? Well, let me tell you something, Jessica. Stop talking," I said quietly, but with such firmness that Patricia actually paused mid-sentence. "I'm going to say this once, and then I'm going back to my wedding reception to celebrate with people who actually love and support me." I took a step closer, maintaining eye contact with the woman who had spent 28 years trying to make me feel small. "You are not welcome in my life anymore. You will not contact me. You will not show up at my home or my business, and you will not attempt to insert yourself into my marriage or any future family David and I create together." Patricia's eyes filled with tears, but I could see the calculation behind them. "Jessica, please. I know I made mistakes, but I'm your mother. We can work through this." "No, we can't, because working through this would require you to acknowledge that your behavior was wrong and to make genuine changes in how you treat people. Instead, you're standing in a parking lot on my wedding night, trying to manipulate me into believing that destroying my venue was somehow an act of love." I gestured toward the restored gardens visible through the trees. "Look around you, Patricia. Look at what real family support actually looks like. David's parents didn't try to control our wedding planning or impose their vision on our celebration. When you attacked their property, they didn't respond with revenge or drama. They simply fixed what you broke and made it better than it was before." Patricia seemed to shrink as the full weight of her failure became apparent. "What am I supposed to do now?" Your father has filed for divorce, you won't speak to me, and Amanda is taking your side in everything. You're supposed to get therapy, take responsibility for your actions, and learn how to have relationships based on respect rather than control. But that's your choice to make, not my responsibility to manage. I turned to walk back toward the reception, then paused and looked back at her one final time. And Patricia, if you ever try to contact me or show up at my home or business, I will have you arrested for harassment. The Martinez family has excellent attorneys, and they're very protective of their family members. As I walked back through the gardens, toward the sounds of music and laughter coming from our reception, I felt something I had never experienced after a confrontation with Patricia. Complete peace. There was no guilt, no second-guessing, no wondering if I had been too harsh or if I should give her another chance. I had finally set clear boundaries with someone who had spent decades refusing to respect any boundaries at all. David was waiting for me just inside the French doors, his face anxious with concern. When he saw my expression, his shoulders relaxed, with visible relief. "How did it go?" he asked, pulling me into his arms. "It went exactly as it needed to go," I replied, reaching up to straighten his tie. "She's gone, and she understands that she's not welcome in our lives going forward. Are you okay?" I looked around the ballroom at our guests, who were dancing and laughing and celebrating our marriage with genuine joy. I saw Emma spinning with Miguel on the dance floor, my father deep in conversation with Roberto about something that was making them both laugh, and Maria showing Lucy how to do a traditional Mexican folk dance step. "I'm better than okay," I said, meaning it completely. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, with exactly the people who belong in our lives." David and I rejoined our reception, and the energy of the celebration seemed to multiply as the evening continued. The DJ played a perfect mix of music that kept multiple generations on the dance floor, and the dessert service that Isabella had prepared was met with applause from our guests. As the evening wound down and guests began to say their goodbyes, I was struck by how many people took time to share meaningful words about our marriage and their hopes for our future. These weren't generic wedding pleasantries, but heartfelt expressions from people who had genuinely invested in our happiness. Roberto Martinez found me during the final hour of the reception, as I was saying goodbye to some of my business clients, who had early flights the next morning. He waited patiently until I had finished my conversations, then approached with the warmth and dignity that characterized everything about David's father. "Jessica, I wanted to speak with you privately. Before the evening ends," he said, gesturing toward a quiet corner of the ballroom. We sat in 2 chairs that had been arranged to overlook the gardens, now illuminated by moonlight and the romantic lighting that would remain on throughout the night. "Maria and I have been talking about everything that has happened this week," Roberto began, "and we want you to know how impressed we are with the grace and strength you've shown. Building a business, planning a wedding, and dealing with family sabotage simultaneously would have broken most people. But you never lost sight of what was truly important." He paused, looking out at the gardens that had been restored to even greater beauty than before. "David told us tonight about your conversation with your mother in the parking lot and about the boundaries you've established going forward. We want you to know that you have our complete support in protecting your marriage and any family you and David create together." Roberto reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card that I recognized as belonging to their family attorney. "James Peterson has been our family's legal counsel for over 20 years, and he's handled everything from business acquisitions to protecting our family members from people who have tried to take advantage of our success. If your mother violates the boundaries you've set or attempts to interfere in your life in any way, you call James immediately." I was moved by the practical nature of his support. This wasn't just emotional validation, but concrete protection for the life David and I were building together. "Roberto, I can't thank you enough for everything your family has done this week. You turned what could have been the worst week of my life into something that proved how strong our support system really is." That's what family does, Jessica. And you're family now. Not because you married David, but because you've shown us who you really are when facing challenges. Character isn't revealed when things are easy. It's revealed when everything falls apart and you have to decide what kind of person you're going to be. As the last of our guests departed and the venue staff began the process of cleaning up, David and I took one final walk through the gardens where we had been married just hours earlier. The areas that had been destroyed by Patricia's sabotage were now filled with flowering plants and lighting that created an atmosphere even more magical than what we had originally planned. "Do you think she'll actually stay away?" David asked as we paused beside the waterfall that his family had installed during the restoration. "I think she'll test the boundaries a few times. But yes, I think she'll eventually accept that I'm serious about not having her in my life. The difference now is that I'm not a frightened daughter trying to avoid conflict. I'm a married woman with a strong support system and the resources to enforce the boundaries I've set." David pulled me closer, and we stood together in the gardens where we had promised to build a life based on mutual respect and genuine partnership. "I love you, Mrs. Martinez, and I love the family we're going to create together. I love you too. And I love knowing that our children will grow up in a family where love isn't conditional and support isn't contingent on meeting impossible standards." As we prepared to leave Sunset Gardens estate and begin our honeymoon, I realized that Patricia's attempt to destroy our wedding had actually given us the most precious gift imaginable: absolute certainty about the choices we had made and the values we would build our marriage on. We had been tested by crisis and had emerged stronger, more united, and more committed to protecting the love we shared. The last thing I saw as we drove away from our wedding venue was the sign at the entrance reading Sunset Gardens Estate, a Martinez Hospitality Group property. In just 1 week, I had gone from being someone whose mother thought she could sabotage without consequences to being a member of a family that owned the very property she had tried to destroy. Sometimes the best revenge really is building something so beautiful that your enemy's negativity becomes irrelevant. 6 months after our wedding, I sat in the executive conference room of Martinez Hospitality Group, reviewing quarterly reports that showed record growth across all their venue properties. My role had evolved naturally from being David's wife to becoming a strategic consultant for the family business, applying the digital marketing expertise I had built with my own company to help expand their reach and profitability. The transformation had been gradual but profound. What started as casual conversations over Sunday family dinners about marketing opportunities had developed into a formal consulting arrangement that allowed me to maintain my own business while contributing to the Martinez family's continued success. Roberto had been particularly enthusiastic about my ideas for leveraging social media to showcase their venues, and Maria had embraced my suggestions for creating wedding packages that told complete stories rather than just providing services. As I worked through the latest analytics reports, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. For a moment, my heart rate spiked, wondering if Patricia had found a new way to contact me despite the clear boundaries I had established. Instead, the message was from Morrison, the contractor Patricia had hired to vandalize our wedding venue. "Mrs. Martinez, this is John Morrison. I wanted to reach out because I've been following the news about your mother's trial, and I have information that might be relevant to the case. Would you be willing to meet for coffee to discuss what really happened that day?" I stared at the message for several minutes, processing the implications. Patricia's criminal trial was scheduled to begin in 2 weeks, and while I had been prepared to testify about the damage to our venue, I hadn't expected any additional revelations about her planning or motivations. After discussing the message with David and calling James Peterson, the Martinez family attorney, I agreed to meet with Morrison at a coffee shop in downtown Phoenix. When I arrived, I found him sitting at a corner table, looking significantly more troubled than he had appeared during the brief interaction at our destroyed venue. "Mrs. Martinez, thank you for agreeing to meet with me," Morrison began, his voice heavy with obvious guilt. "I need to tell you what really happened when your mother hired me. because I can't sleep at night knowing that I participated in something so deliberately malicious." He pulled out a folder containing what appeared to be email printouts and handwritten notes. "Your mother didn't just hire me to conduct a safety inspection that got out of hand. She contacted me 3 weeks before your wedding with a very specific plan to cause enough damage to force you to change venues." Morrison spread the documents across the table, and I could see email exchanges that made my blood run cold. Patricia had researched my wedding venue extensively, had identified the most expensive and difficult-to-replace elements of the property, and had created a detailed plan for destroying them in a way that would look like the discovery of serious safety violations. She told me that you were being manipulated by your fiancé's family into having a wedding that was beyond your means, and that you were too proud to admit you needed help scaling back to something more appropriate, Morrison continued. She said that if I created enough concern about the venue's safety, you would be grateful when she arranged an alternative wedding at a place that was more suitable for your actual budget. I felt sick reading Patricia's emails, not because I was surprised by her deception, but because I could see the calculated precision with which she had planned to destroy my happiness. This wasn't impulsive sabotage born from emotional reaction. This was premeditated psychological warfare designed to prove that I couldn't succeed without her intervention. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. Morrison looked down at his hands, clearly struggling with shame about his role in the destruction. "Because after I met your husband's family and saw how they responded to what we had done, I realized that your mother had lied to me about everything. Those people didn't act like manipulative social climbers trying to impress anyone. They acted like a family that genuinely cared about making sure your wedding happened exactly as you had planned it." He pulled out another document, this one showing a payment schedule that made me gasp. "Your mother paid me $15,000 to destroy your venue, with a bonus payment promised if I could make the damage look like it was caused by discovering legitimate safety violations. She had already arranged for a photographer to document the unsafe conditions, and had scheduled meetings with 3 alternative venues for the day after the sabotage." The evidence Morrison provided transformed Patricia's criminal trial from a case about impulsive vandalism to one about calculated fraud and conspiracy. When James Peterson reviewed the documents, he immediately contacted the prosecutor's office to share the new information, and Patricia's charges were upgraded to include fraud, conspiracy to commit property destruction, and attempted theft by deception. The trial itself was a surreal experience. Sitting in the witness stand, describing the destruction of our wedding venue while Patricia sat at the defendant's table, I felt like I was testifying about events that had happened to someone else. The woman who had been devastated by her mother's manipulation and desperate for family approval felt like a different person entirely from the confident businesswoman who could calmly present evidence of criminal behavior. Patricia's defense attorney tried to portray her actions as the misguided efforts of a concerned mother, but Morrison's testimony and the documentary evidence made it impossible to maintain that narrative. The emails showed months of planning. The payment records proved financial motivation, and the systematic nature of the damage demonstrated criminal intent rather than emotional impulse. When the judge delivered Patricia's sentence, 2 years in prison, 5 years of probation, and full restitution for the property damage plus punitive damages, I felt nothing resembling satisfaction or revenge. Instead, I felt the profound relief that comes with official validation that her behavior had been unacceptable and that there would be consequences for her actions. Richard attended every day of the trial, sitting in the gallery but not attempting to speak with me unless I initiated contact. His presence was a quiet statement of support that meant more to me than dramatic gestures would have. After the sentencing, he approached me in the courthouse hallway with tears in his eyes. "Jessica, I know I can't undo the years when I failed to protect you from her behavior, but I want you to know that I understand now what she really is, and I'm proud of the strength you've shown in standing up to her." Over the following months, Richard and I began the slow process of rebuilding our relationship. It wasn't easy, and there were conversations that reopened old wounds. But gradually, we found our way to a connection based on mutual respect, rather than the dysfunction that had characterized our family for so many years. Amanda had been even more affected by the trial revelations than I had expected. Learning about the calculated nature of Patricia's sabotage had forced her to reevaluate her own childhood experiences and recognize patterns of manipulation that she had previously dismissed as normal family dynamics. "I keep thinking about all the times she convinced me that you were being too sensitive or overreacting to things she said or did," Amanda told me during one of our weekly phone calls. "Now I realize that she was systematically undermining your confidence while making me feel like I was the reasonable one for not speaking up." The process of healing our sibling relationship became one of the unexpected gifts that emerged from the chaos Patricia had created. Amanda and I discovered that we actually had a lot in common once we weren't competing for approval from someone who withheld it strategically to maintain control. Meanwhile, my integration into the Martinez family continued to deepen in ways that sometimes surprised me with their naturalness. Maria had started including me in the monthly planning meetings for their hospitality group, not as David's wife who was being politely included, but as a business consultant whose insights were genuinely valued. Roberto had begun introducing me to other business owners in Phoenix as his daughter rather than his daughter-in-law, a distinction that might have seemed minor to outsiders, but felt profoundly meaningful to someone who had spent years fighting for recognition of her capabilities. The success of my marketing strategies for Martinez Hospitality Group had led to referrals from other business owners, and my own company was growing faster than I had ever imagined possible. More importantly, I was building a professional reputation based on my actual abilities, rather than constantly having to prove that I deserved the opportunities I had earned. One evening in late spring, as David and I were having dinner on the patio of our new home in Paradise Valley, he brought up a conversation we had been having intermittently for several months. "I've been thinking more about what we discussed regarding starting a family," he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "I know you wanted to wait until things settled down after the trial and everything with your mother, but I feel like we're in a really good place now." I looked around our home, with its open architecture that flowed seamlessly between indoor and outdoor spaces, the garden we had planted together, and the sense of peace that had become the foundation of our daily life. "I think you're right. I feel like we've built something strong enough to bring children into." The conversation about starting a family led to deeper discussions about what kind of parents we wanted to be and what values we wanted to pass on to our children. We talked about creating a home where achievements were celebrated rather than minimized, where love was expressed through support rather than control, and where children would grow up knowing that they were valued for who they were rather than criticized for who they weren't. 6 months later, I discovered I was pregnant with our first child. The pregnancy announcement to David's family was met with the kind of joyful celebration that I had always imagined family milestones should inspire. Maria cried happy tears and immediately began planning ways to help with the baby, while Roberto started talking about the legacy he hoped to pass on to his grandchildren. Richard's reaction to learning he would be a grandfather was more complicated but ultimately deeply moving. "Jessica, I failed as a father in many ways, but I hope I can be the kind of grandfather who helps your children understand how extraordinary their mother is." The contrast with how I imagined Patricia might have responded to the pregnancy news was stark and sad. I knew she would have found ways to make the announcement about herself, would have criticized our timing or our preparedness, and would have tried to insert herself into our parenting decisions in ways that would have created stress rather than support. Instead, I was surrounded by people who were genuinely excited about our growing family and who wanted to contribute to our children's happiness rather than use them to meet their own emotional needs. As my pregnancy progressed, I found myself reflecting often on the journey that had brought me to this point. 2 years earlier, I had been a successful businesswoman who was nonetheless constantly seeking approval from people who withheld it strategically. I had been planning a wedding while managing a mother who was actively sabotaging my happiness, and I had been so accustomed to dysfunction that I almost missed recognizing what healthy family relationships actually looked like. The destruction of our wedding venue, which had seemed like the worst possible crisis at the time, had actually become the catalyst for the most positive transformation of my life. Patricia's sabotage had forced me to choose between accepting her control and protecting the life I wanted to build with David. Making that choice had required me to find strength I hadn't known I possessed, but it had also connected me to a family that celebrated that strength rather than trying to diminish it. When our daughter Elena was born on a crisp October morning, exactly 2 years after our wedding, I held her in my arms and felt overwhelming gratitude for the journey that had brought us to this moment. She would grow up in a family where love was unconditional, where achievements were celebrated, and where she would never have to choose between being herself and being accepted. David's parents were among the first visitors to meet their granddaughter, and watching Roberto hold Elena while Maria took what seemed like hundreds of photographs, I was struck by how different this experience was from the family dynamics I had grown up with. These grandparents weren't interested in controlling our parenting choices or inserting themselves into our decisions. They simply wanted to love and support our family in whatever ways we found most helpful. Richard's visit to meet Elena was more emotional and complicated. He held his granddaughter with the careful reverence of someone who understood that this was a privilege he needed to earn rather than a right he could assume. "She's beautiful, Jessica, and she's lucky to have parents who will protect her from the kind of damage that toxic family relationships can cause." As Elena grew from an infant into a toddler with David's dark eyes and my determined personality, I watched her interact with her extended family and felt deep satisfaction knowing that she was developing her sense of self in an environment of unconditional love and support. She would never have to wonder whether her achievements were good enough, or worry that expressing her opinions would result in emotional punishment. The Martinez family business continued to thrive, partly due to the marketing strategies I had implemented, but mostly because of the foundation of integrity and genuine service that Roberto and Maria had built over decades. My own consulting company had grown to the point where I was able to be selective about clients, choosing to work only with businesses whose values aligned with my own. 3 years after Elena's birth, David and I welcomed our son Gabriel, and I was amazed by how naturally our family expanded to accommodate another person. The skills I had learned in building my business, strategic planning, problem solving, and maintaining clear boundaries, translated surprisingly well to parenting, and I found myself able to provide the kind of consistent, supportive guidance that I had wished for during my own childhood. Richard had gradually earned his way back into our lives through consistent respect for our boundaries and genuine interest in our children's welfare. He never criticized our parenting choices, never tried to undermine our decisions, and never attempted to use his relationship with Elena and Gabriel to manipulate us. His transformation from enabler of Patricia's dysfunction to supportive grandfather had been one of the most positive surprises of our family's evolution. Amanda had also become a more central part of our lives, especially after she moved back to Phoenix and began working as a teacher. Her own journey of recognizing and healing from Patricia's manipulation had made her fiercely protective of Elena and Gabriel, and she had become the kind of aunt who celebrated their personalities rather than trying to shape them. On our 5th wedding anniversary, David and I returned to Sunset Gardens Estate for a private dinner in the same gardens where we had been married. The venue had become even more beautiful over the years, with the landscaping that had been replanted after Patricia's sabotage now mature and lush. The waterfall that David's family had installed during the restoration sparkled in the evening light, and the whole space felt infused with the joy of the celebration it had hosted. Do you ever think about what would have happened if your mother hadn't destroyed the venue? David asked as we walked through the gardens after dinner. I considered the question seriously. I think we would have had a beautiful wedding anyway, but I don't think it would have been as meaningful. Her sabotage forced us to discover how strong our support system really was, and it gave me the opportunity to prove to myself that I could protect what mattered most to me. David pulled me closer as we paused beside the fountain where we had taken some of our favorite wedding photographs. I'm grateful for everything that happened, even the difficult parts. It all led us to exactly where we are now. As we prepared to leave Sunset Gardens estate that evening, I thought about the life we had built together and the family we were raising. Elena and Gabriel would grow up knowing that they were loved unconditionally, that their achievements would be celebrated, and that their parents would always protect them from people who tried to diminish their worth. They would never have to choose between being themselves and being accepted, because they would grow up in a family where authenticity was valued more than compliance, and where love was expressed through support rather than control. The woman, who had stood in the ruins of her wedding venue 5 years earlier, devastated by her mother's sabotage but determined to protect her future, had built something beautiful from those ashes. Not just a successful marriage and a thriving family, but a completely different understanding of what family relationships could and should be. Patricia remained in prison and would likely remain there for several more months. I hadn't spoken to her since the courthouse confrontation, and I had no plans to change that. Some people had suggested that forgiveness required maintaining contact or giving her opportunities to make amends, but I had learned that real forgiveness sometimes meant accepting that someone was incapable of change and protecting yourself and your family accordingly. The Phoenix skyline glittered in the distance as David and I drove home to our children, who were spending the evening with Maria and Roberto. Tomorrow would bring the usual challenges of running businesses and raising small children, but tonight, I felt the deep contentment that comes from knowing that every choice I had made in building this life had been the right one. I had learned that the best revenge against people who try to tear you down isn't proving them wrong. It's building something so beautiful that their negativity becomes irrelevant. And I had built something extraordinary. A marriage based on mutual respect, a family founded on unconditional love, and a life where I never had to apologize for being exactly who I was meant to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.